The exact moment an avoidant realizes you gave up usually arrives quietly, when your absence stops chasing their nervous system for reassurance. At first, they may not call it loss. They call it space, calm, or finally being able to breathe without pressure again. But underneath that relief, their body notices something different. The familiar emotional signal from you has gone completely silent in the background. This is stage one, where freedom feels real, but the missing pull has not yet reached their conscious mind with full force. They may act normal, answer less, post more, or seem lighter because distance still feels safer than emotional responsibility for the moment. They expect your message to return because in the past, your care often filled the silence they created before things settled again. So their first realization is not heartbreak. It is confusion when the old pattern refuses to restart inside the relationship again quietly. They check for proof you are still there, even while pretending they are not checking at all from a distance anymore tonight. A delayed reply, a viewed story, or one small sign used to reassure them they still had access to your warmth nearby. When those signs disappear, their calm starts feeling less like peace and more like an unfamiliar kind of emptiness they cannot name. Stage two begins when they realize your giving up was not anger, but a boundary that finally stayed in place without shaking anymore. This unsettles them because avoidant distance usually depends on knowing someone loving will still remain emotionally nearby after every withdrawal, again quietly. They may replay your last conversations, searching for the exact point where your softness turned into final quiet without any warning sign. What hurts them is not only losing you, but losing the version of themselves that you kept believing in for so long. They start sensing that your patience was not weakness. It was effort they misunderstood while protecting themselves from closeness for years inside. This is where their nervous system becomes divided, with one part relieved and another part quietly alarmed by your absence now completely. They may still avoid reaching out because contact would force them to admit the distance finally caused something real, this time emotionally. Instead, they test the silence indirectly, looking for signs that your heart left slowly or all at once, without asking directly yet. They may tell themselves you are being dramatic, but the explanation feels weaker each day you stay gone without chasing them back. Stage two ends when they understand your silence is not a tactic designed to pull them closer through guilt anymore or fear. It is the first time they feel the weight of a door they believed would never fully close between both lives again. Stage three begins when they stop measuring your absence as silence and start measuring it as a consequence they cannot soften now. They notice everyday places where your attention used to appear, and those spaces feel strangely louder than before inside their mind now. A song, a street, or a quiet evening can expose how much emotional structure you quietly provided when they felt overwhelmed alone. They may feel irritation first, because sadness often arrives disguised as annoyance in someone trained to avoid need for emotional safety again. Your absence challenges their old belief that closeness is dangerous, because your closeness was also their hidden comfort during difficult days too. This contradiction creates inner pressure, because they wanted safety from intimacy, but also depended on your steady presence more than admitted before. They begin remembering moments they minimized, like your careful questions, your small compromises, and your attempts to understand their guarded reactions better. The ache becomes sharper when they realize you were not asking for perfection, only emotional participation that felt possible to others too. They may compare new distractions with your consistency, then discover distraction cannot replace being emotionally known by someone patient and real anymore. This is the moment regret begins, not as a dramatic confession, but as a quiet pressure under ordinary routines they cannot escape. They might draft messages they never send, because wanting repair feels safer in imagination than in real vulnerability with actual risk involved. Stage 3 deepens when they understand giving you space was different from leaving you emotionally alone for too long without reassurance there. They recognize that you did not leave because you stopped caring. You left because caring without return became self-abandonment inside the relationship. That realization can feel threatening because it makes their old defenses look less protective and more lonely than they expected at night. They may swing between missing you and blaming you because blame delays the grief they are not ready to hold inside themselves. But every time blame fades, the same truth returns. You finally protected the part of yourself they kept exhausting with repeated distance. Their pride may keep them silent, but silence no longer feels powerful once they know you are not waiting outside the door. The emotional impact is delayed because avoidant people often process loss after the pressure to respond disappears from the relationship completely first. When there is nothing left to resist, their feelings finally have room to become undeniable inside the quiet they wanted so badly. Stage 3 ends when they no longer ask whether you will return, but whether they pushed you too far to come back. Stage 4 begins when regret turns toward accountability, even if they still cannot speak it clearly, without feeling exposed and small inside. They start seeing the pattern from your side, where every withdrawal demanded extra patience from you while giving little comfort back again. They remember times you asked for clarity, and they answered with distance, jokes, silence, or emotional fog when honesty felt unsafe inside. Now those memories feel different because your requests no longer look needy, they look reasonable, human, and tired after waiting too long. This stage can bring shame, especially if they realize they accepted devotion they were not prepared to reciprocate with equal courage then. Shame may make them disappear again, not because they feel nothing, but because facing you feels morally exposed after everything done before. They may wonder whether apologizing would help you, or simply reopen a wound you worked hard to close with quiet discipline alone. That uncertainty can freeze them, because accountability requires action, while avoidance survives through postponement and carefully delayed decisions when feelings rise fast. They may start checking your boundaries, not to manipulate, but to learn whether the bridge still exists somewhere beyond silence between you. A small message, a reaction, or a careful question can become their safest way of touching the closed door without fully knocking. But if you stay calm and distant, they realize your boundary is no longer waiting for permission from their comfort or fear. This is painful because it removes the old power imbalance where they controlled closeness by moving away whenever intimacy felt dangerous inside. Now you control your own peace. And that shift can feel like rejection to someone used to being pursued after they withdrew. They may finally understand that love cannot stay alive on potential, memories, and one person doing all repair after every rupture alone. Stage 4 is not just missing you. It is seeing the emotional labor they kept avoiding while you stayed hopeful for them. They may feel respect for your silence, because it shows a strength they did not expect from your tenderness after so much. This respect can become the first honest opening, because admiration often reaches them before vulnerability does inside a guarded heart like theirs. Still, they may hesitate, because repairing would mean meeting the version of you who no longer overextends to keep connection alive alone. That version feels unfamiliar, not because you changed cruelly, but because you stopped shrinking around their fear just to stay near them. Stage 4 ends when they realize any future with you would require consistency, not just longing after the damage already done there. They understand that missing you is not the same as becoming safe enough to love you well with honest presence every day. This is where fantasy ends, and the real cost of emotional distance finally becomes visible inside both hearts without excuses anymore left. Stage 5 begins with a choice they cannot avoid: reach out honestly, or let the loss become permanent without another defense available. Some avoidants choose silence because regret feels easier to carry than the risk of being rejected by someone they hurt deeply before. Their pride tells them that if you wanted them, you would still leave a door open somewhere for their return again later. But another part knows you already left doors, windows, chances, and explanations until your spirit became exhausted from holding hope alone too. That knowledge can haunt them because it removes the comforting story that you gave up too easily without trying hard enough first. If they reach out, the message often sounds smaller than the emotional storm behind it, because vulnerability still frightens them at first. They may say something simple, almost casual, hoping your response will reveal whether repair is still possible without exposing everything inside yet. To you, it may look too late, too small, or too controlled compared with what you needed when you were breaking inside. To them, it may feel enormous, because they are stepping toward the exact vulnerability they avoided for most of the relationship before. This difference explains why their realization may not arrive in the form you secretly imagined when you wanted closure from them badly. It may not be a grand apology, a dramatic return, or a perfectly worded confession that finally proves everything to you clearly. Sometimes it is only a pause, a softened tone, or a careful attempt to stand closer without knowing what happens next yet. But the real test is not whether they miss you, it is whether they can stop repeating the pattern that hurt you. Missing you may be emotional, but changing for connection requires self-awareness, discomfort, honesty, and repeated behavior after the first apology is over. That is why their realization alone does not guarantee reunion, healing, or safety for your heart after so much uncertainty and waiting. You are allowed to notice their awakening without volunteering to become the place where they practice growth at your expense again now. Their pain may be real, and your decision to protect yourself may also be completely valid after what happened between you both. Stage 5 becomes mature only when they stop asking how to regain access and start asking how to repair trust properly now. If they cannot do that, their realization remains a private lesson, not a healthy invitation back into your life or heart again. If they can, their words will slowly become matched by behavior that feels stable, respectful, and grounded across ordinary days with you. The exact moment they realize you gave up is not 1 second. It is a chain of recognitions arriving after silence settles. First, they feel relief, then confusion, then loss, then accountability, and finally, the burden of choice they can no longer avoid inside. Each stage strips away one defense until the truth becomes too simple to keep explaining away with distance or pride anymore alone. You were not asking them to lose freedom. You were asking them to stop confusing freedom with emotional absence inside a relationship. You were not punishing them by leaving. You were ending a cycle that kept teaching you to disappear from your own needs. When they understand that, the realization becomes deeper than missing your texts, your warmth, or your attention during lonely, quiet hours now. They realize they lost access to someone who kept choosing them while quietly begging to be chosen back with the same care. That recognition can break through avoidance because it connects love with consequence, not love with pressure the way they expected before then. Still, their awakening does not erase your exhaustion, and it does not require you to reopen what you already closed for peace. Sometimes the healthiest ending is letting their realization belong to them, while your healing belongs to you without carrying both anymore now. Sometimes repair is possible, but only when their fear stops being the center of every conversation and your needs matter too again. Either way, the moment they realize you gave up should not become the moment you abandon yourself to comfort them again there. You can feel compassion for their delayed understanding and still protect the peace you fought to regain after months of confusion alone. The avoidant realizes you gave up when your love no longer bends around their distance or waits outside their fear each night. They realize it when your silence stops sounding like protest and starts sounding like self-respect they can no longer control or postpone. They realize it when the person who always understood them finally chooses to understand themselves first without asking for permission anymore again. They realize it when closeness is no longer offered automatically, and earning trust becomes the only path left back toward you again. That is the quiet shock avoidance never plans for. Love can leave without screaming, begging, or threatening once it finally chooses peace. And once it leaves that way, the absence often teaches more than every conversation ever could when words were ignored for too long. The lesson may reach them late, but lateness does not make your boundary less sacred or your healing less real today anymore. Their realization belongs to their growth, while your next chapter belongs to your nervous system finally feeling safe inside love again someday. And if they truly change, it will show through steady presence, not panic after your absence became permanent in their life forever.